Attention, Canadians. Do you feel disconnected from our current political system? This could be our last chance to take a real legal stand for our rights. It's time to shift the political power to its rightful owners, the Canadian citizens and Indigenous peoples of Canada. Dive into our history, understand the need for change, and embark on the quest for true democracy. Are you concerned about our nation's commitment to human rights and self-governance? The power shift to freedom aligns with vital treaties and international laws enabling us to claim our rightful place as collective head of state. We advocate legally replacing the Crown, King Charles III, and our partocracy system with a true democracy, the peoples as the true collective head of state with veto power over our governance, to ensure your voice counts more than party interests. When our national collective civil and political rights are respected, your influence on policies will be direct and impactful. Join us on this noble struggle to make every Canadian and Indigenous peoples a meaningful participant in our future as collective head of state, which was legally owed and kept from us since the patriation of our Constitution, an official decolonization from the United Kingdom of 1982. It's time to correct the past of our government's lies and omissions to the people of our great country before it is too late. People 15 years old and over can sign our Canadian People's Referendum at canadianreferendum.ca and unite for our rights as the collective head of state in our Constitution. Together, we can be the example in reshaping Canada's future, not just for us, but for all peoples worldwide, once and for all. Are you ready to be part of this transformative movement? Join the Power Shift to Freedom movement by the Canadian People's Union and be part of a bold vision for Canada's future. Visit thecpu.ca for more details. Embrace and face the change required on your part to shape our future.
Here we go. So that's just a short introduction into what we've been doing, what we've been working on since 2017. And, we were hoping that a lot more people would have, signed up and understood what we were trying to do. But it's really hard because there's a lot involved. And, you have to understand why you want to do this and what are our rights as Canadian citizens, and not just us, but this also serves for everybody on the planet. Every country has these rights. So now I'm going to proceed with this and show you exactly what I showed yesterday in a presentation. It is long, and if people want to save their country, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, it's too long and your videos are long to listen to and I don't have the time. And, you have no excuse. If you're really serious about saving this country and the future of your families and your children and our natural resources and protecting everything in Canada, then you need to take the time to listen. We all have to take responsibility for our country and our future. If you don't have the time, then please pass on to something else, because then you are not ready to protect your country. Everybody needs to be ready. This is serious. This has huge implications, not for just Canadians, but for Canada as a whole, worldwide. Because the Crown has lost all dignity, and the Governor General, who represents the Crown, and here I'm talking about King Charles and the Queen previously, since 1982, they have allowed our governments to commit a huge fraud against the Indigenous nations and the Canadian citizens since the partial patriation of Canada in our Constitution from the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom, the Crown itself, and all of the realms involved under the Crown are guilty of allowing this to go on and for Canadians not to get their rights recognized. And the work of the Crown, of the Queen, and now the King, they are supposed to, and the Governor Generals all the way down to 1982, were to protect the people. And this is where you're going to learn in this presentation where the Crown sits with the people, where the Crown has a right to override our government, even though the government has the support of Parliament. In 2020, there were letters that were released finally from the Queen directly to the Governor General in Australia that exactly justifies what we're saying, and that the Crown, because it is a corporation sole and also a corporation body politic and corporation aggregate, you will hear all of these explanations in our presentation. It is responsible to the people first and foremost, okay, not to our parliamentarians. And our parliamentarians are responsible to Parliament and to the people. Now, the Governor General, by allowing what has been happening and the corruption of the last 4 years, especially the last 4 years, that we've had to endure with the Trudeau government, first by his father, and now being finalized by Justin Trudeau himself, to, for their end game of destroying this country, needs to stop. And the Governor General has the power, the full power, to remove him immediately, even if he'd have the support of Parliament, for the allegations of corruption, ethics, and making our country go into huge debts based on fallacies. So the last 4 years and all of the monies that the federal government has taken has been done illicitly. The laws that they have created are unconstitutional, because I will prove in this video that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms also covers the international law instruments, which is our body of human rights, social and cultural rights, and our civil and political rights. So those all embody the same things, protecting us against a rogue government and rogue politicians. And those were supposed to be to override those rights at the international level, signed in 1976 by Canada and the UK. You will see that even the UK between 1981 and 1982 state that Canada is bound to those international instruments it has signed. However, they felt that if Canada wanted to override their obligations and to risk being sued and charged at the international level, well, the UK wasn't going to have it. Okay, they refused. So in 1982, Pierre-Éliott Trudeau did not get the patriation he was expecting. The only thing that was missing, what was missing for the Crown to be able to finalize with the UK our patriation of 1982, was a full referendum across the country by Canadian citizens. And then for the Indigenous nations to have their own referendum in regards to what was going to be placed in that constitution, and if they'd accept it or not. Not by their representatives, and it wasn't supposed to be only by the representatives of the people in the provinces. It was by the people themselves, each and every single person in Canada, either Indigenous or Canadian citizen. And this is what we're going to prove today to use. It is long, and please bear with me. I did it yesterday, and yes, it is very long, but there are 80 slides, And I need to be able to make this presentation so that people all understand it, people all study it, and you can take that to court. Okay? So hopefully things will go well. I will not lose the internet as I usually, sometimes do, but it will keep playing anyways. So please bear with us. Stay tuned in, and the feed should come right back. Okay. And then you'll be able to re-listen to the video whenever you want to. And if it's too long for you, you can always come back. But please refrain from, putting insults in the comments or whatever. You're wasting your time. Okay. So just be very attentive and listen to what we're saying and read what you will be seeing on the board. Okay. So I will leave you with that, and we'll proceed to the presentation. Okay. So I'm just going to bring this down here for a minute so that I can get to it. And because I've added a page here, so I'm going to go to presentation from the beginning. Okay. Okay, so I tried to, I showed this part of this presentation yesterday to other groups. And it's time for everybody to get together and to do this across the country. It doesn't cost anything for you to sign your Citizens Convention of Consent. But what you will be getting is by the end of the weekend, we will have another form for you to fill out for just the referendum itself, saying, and we add that to the Convention of Consent. So the Convention of Consent and what we will be posting on the website will be easier for everybody to sign and to rise with, and everybody will be able to do that right across the country. Okay, so now I'm going to go back here and share screen with you. Okay. Now, where am I here? Oops. Oh, there we go. And share. Okay, so you could all see this. So the question here is the Canadian government guilty of stolen patriation, stolen rights, stolen DNA, and now committed the SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 fraud to implement the WHO and the WEF's transhumanist agenda without our knowledge or consent? This is something that when you see the full presentation, which is almost 170 pages, that I've created to connect all the dots, we're not going to be showing you that today. Today, we're just taking care of why we need this referendum, why we have the right to a referendum, and what are our full rights to implement this. So another question, another statement that I make here, it's time for the Governor General to fire Trudeau. It's time for Canadians and the Indigenous peoples to take our full rights stolen from us since 1982 through the people's referendums for both. Okay, so the Governor General needs to remove or refuse the Liberal or NDP Liberal coalition or any coalition with the Liberals because of the allegations of corruption, the amounts of money. $400 million is nothing, of the monies that they took for their unethically in regards to their own families' businesses and their friends' businesses. And because actually what they did is they also voted on top of our budget, also voted for an extra $202 billion, almost $203 billion of our funds for whatever between 2024 to 2025. So they don't speak about this. Neither do the Conservatives, because they all voted for this. So now the challenge is that we need to move forward in our rights because nobody is really protecting Canadians right now. And neither is the Governor General or the Crown itself or the justices. So we have to take things into our own hands, because what they did in 1982 was a coup d'etat against we the people. What we are doing is standing in our rights lawfully and legally and advancing our legal rights, our legal, civil, and political rights, to be able to have the right to our collective self-determination denied to us since 1982. So there are only three things that allow politicians to rule over the people: blind trust of others, ignorance of legal facts, and lack of action by the people. What can change this into a power shift? Because right now the people should be in power. The people have the right to be in power. The government does not have sole authority to be able to be in power over the people. So they can go and sign our Convention of Consent, which is a collective declaration of independence in a way. But our Declaration of Independence was already done in 1982. All we need now is for the government to place the people in power. Because what should have happened in 1982 is we should have had the right to decide whether we would keep the crown or place the people in power above government. And, you know, who wouldn't want to put the people in power above government, right? Other than a government that wants to take the total control over the people and steal our rights. And that is exactly what happened in 1982. So now we're going to set the record straight, because at the time they were Pierre Trudeau was trying to destroy all of the Indigenous treaty rights. And the UK saved that for the Indigenous nations, but now we need to maintain it, because they're still trying to destroy those rights. And through the WEF and what's happening in the Great Reset, everybody will lose their rights worldwide. What is happening now with the wars and everything else, they are trying to destroy all of our international laws, through our human rights laws, to instill world law. So it needs to stop now. We need to take action, and it needs to happen now. So I'm going to proceed with this. So in this presentation, some of you will have seen this before, but some of it has changed since. So here lies the Canadian government's maintain in regards to their actions. The truth must prevail. Okay, so you're going to learn about ongoing theft of the people's collective rights through a false decolonization of 1982, which decolonization also means patriation. So in 1982, when Trudeau used the word patriation, he meant decolonization. And then along that came criminal acts to maintain control over the people and natural resources. And then ongoing human rights abuses and drafting unconstitutional laws, which means government denial of the people's rights while drafting of laws, which would make that unconstitutional to begin with. Now, lies by omissions regarding the true powers of the Governor General and her fiduciary duty to the people and the Constitution. Hypocrisy regarding the personal reserved powers of the Crown and Governor Generals above government and the courts. So the Governor General is there with full powers of the Crown to be able to remove Trudeau, and her job is to protect our finances and our economy and everything else and the people by actually maintaining a good government. And right now she is not doing that. So then we also have contractual fraud against international signatory countries, purposeful misrepresentation of intent. And that means that all of the when you speak to the lawyers and everything, they'll say Canada does not recognize international law inside of Canada. That is a fallacy. That is a lie. Canada is bound by those international instruments they have signed. You will see a list of them. And by that, Canada has committed fraud against all of the countries who have signed on to the same things. Okay, so Canada is in breach of international law, and those countries need to charge our government with having failed to respect international law. And then we have medical fraud, DNA theft, and other crimes against Canadians, countries, and the whole of humanity regarding SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 protocol. This is an international criminal liability. This will not be shown today, but we've shown it previously. So now the solution, the People's Legal Right Action through the Power Shift to Freedom, the cpu.ca. And then we have another, we continue here. Now, based on the Human Genome Project 2001-2003 and the Medical Countermeasures Consortium COVID-19 protocol, the Government of Canada participated in creating the Department of Defense Medical Countermeasures Consortium with the UK, USA, and Australia for a dual use, what they call dual use, which is gain of function creation of viruses. Now, Justin Trudeau, trying to destroy the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act, since 2017 to remove it from federal criminal law jurisdiction. Everybody who participated in any transhumanist agenda, or even in changing our DNA, doing anything to our genome, could actually be jailed for 10 years in prison and receive $1 million fine. So now Event 201 pre-pandemic exercise that happened between 2018 and 2019 with WEF Board of Director Chrystia Freeland, that is also part of that, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. And then we have the funding of Genome Canada, CanCogen, and other private companies such as Abcelera, which the Canadian government funded, which also made huge benefits for corporate shareholders. So Canadian funds from the Canadian peoples and Indigenous peoples are funding private corporations geared to transhumanist agendas and all kinds of other technologies without our consent, and changing, possibly changing things to our human genome. So again, we need to look deeply into this. There's a lot of criminal activity going on, stuff that should not even be allowed in this country. Now, initiating vaccinations for employees and Canadians through coercive criminal methodologies, among other illicit actions of fraud and negligence, while enforcing continual human rights violations. Now, these are just some of the issues that we've seen in Canada as to why we need to stop our government, as to why a huge investigations needs to be had, and as to why the Crown, King Charles, and previously his mother, and all of the Governor Generals actually misrepresented the people in Canada and put us in jeopardy, and continues to do so today. So so here again, the others that we need to really pay attention to is unconstitutional implementation of the Emergencies Act, Bill C-11, amongst other such, as unconstitutional provincial laws prior and during the pandemic, and presently, since they do not consider our true rights. Illegal arrests, detentions, and fines during COVID-19, implementing COVID-19 measures, ignoring the people's non-derogable rights, instilling a COVID-19 protocol that could be linked to unwarranted deaths, implementing a transhumanist agenda, creating an avalanche of new corporations who may not be following the laws regarding the protection of the human genome and other life forms. I've already repeated that. Now, in also the possibility of racketeering by government officials and employees, which we're seeing under, that $400 million rainfall that they gave themselves, inflating public-private partnership, corporate shareholder profits. Now, there's also too many other questionable acts to add here. So, but first things first, we must enforce our collective and personal rights, as these are our true power above government. We can either decide to keep or remove the monarchy and Governor General, but retain veto power prior to government decision making. We can make better or completely change our current parliamentary democracy system that restricts our ability to veto legislative laws that fail to adequately serve or represent the will of the people. I would say we just need to make it better. We just need to get rid of the corruption. Otherwise, it would work perfectly. We can retain our natural resources to make better use of them so that all Canadians can benefit from them instead of enriching private international corporations. So here we have the unfinished patriation. You're going to learn about the unfinished patriation of the Canadian Constitution, led to a deceptive, unfulfilled decolonization, depriving us of our collective self-determination rights since April 17th, 1982, and nothing has changed since to rectify it. And then you'll learn about the true powers of the Crown in Canada as the sovereign and head of state that our government didn't want us to know about. And then the true powers of the Governor General as the de facto head of state and lieutenant governors, along with rights and responsibilities. They owe fiduciary duty to we the people. They do not owe anything to government other than what's agreed upon. They have to follow the Constitution, but at the same time, they have the reserve power because the Governor General is the only one who can hand out funds when in between elections and when something is urgently needed, because the Governor General is still the head of the military, because the crown, the king right now always, or the queen and the queen before, always kept their military power. And you're going to hear about this you're going to see this in the in regards to their titles. So those are reserve personal powers that they have, and because they are also part of the corporation soul. So here, Pierre Elliott Trudeau and the Queen stole the rights of Canadians and Indigenous nations in 1982. Because even though the UK parliamentarians tried to help us, they warned the Canadian government of what was happening, and all of the premiers, everybody in Parliament, were told what was happening, and everybody lied about it. They continued to lie, and so did the Queen, because her job and the Governor General's job was to protect the citizens. And they should have told the people, even though in 1982 they were given 15 years for a referendum. It never transpired. It ended in 1997, and then nothing was ever said about it until we started discussing the issue. So this whole cover-up is all part and parcel of the crown losing its own dignity by not stepping in to protect the people. And this is why we need to remove the crown so that we can be placed. Because in 1982, we should have removed the crown and placed the people above government, as it should have been. And that's what a free country is supposed to be. So here, in order to prove that what Pierre Elliott Trudeau was trying to do by the patriation was actually a formal decolonization of Canada from the UK. And here you see it there. I'm not going to read all this because then you could come back and read this. But it says, one of his quotes is, "It says to me, as a Canadian head of government, the whole point of decolonization is to establish that we really should not have to convince the British government." And the reason why he said that is because what he prepared for the UK government to redo, to accept the constitution that he was sending out, is because the UK had they were the only ones who had the full power to amend our constitution. To this day, the UK still has the full power to amend our constitution. Why? Because we never had a referendum by the people. So they can't touch it. So here again, patriation in regards to the UK, that was in the Kershaw report, the definition that was there for the patriation definition for Commonwealth, from the Commonwealth Foreign Affairs, says, patriation, as we have explained, is a term which usually signifies the termination by a UK act of the power of the UK Parliament to legislate for Canada, together with the creation by a final UK statute of provisions for the amendment within Canada of all parts of the Canadian Constitution. Because of Section 7, Paragraph 1 of the Statute of Westminster, 1931, the UK Parliament retains the legal power to enact any form of patriation without the request or consent of the Canadian government or Parliament. But any such enactment would be a grave breach of the convention recited in the preamble to the Statute of Westminster. Such was the clear view which the Minister of State, FCO, expressed to us, as we noted his statement that it is not for His Majesty's government's policy to propose unilateral amendments under any circumstances. But when it comes to having to protect the rights of citizens, where the UK has signed on to international agreements that could come back on them, they had to protect our Constitution, and they tried as much as they could. So here, the UK patriation decision between 1980 to 81 in the Kershaw report statement from the Commonwealth Foreign Affairs Committee states, the UK role before 1931. So they had to go back and actually look at things that they would do when there was an issue. So prior to 1931, the UK authorities acknowledged that they would not seek to assess the merits of suitability for Canada of any constitutional amendments requested by Canada. But they did not acknowledge that they were constitutionally required to enact those amendments whenever requested by the Canadian government or Parliament, regardless, in all cases, of provincial concurrence in or dissent from that requested amendment. Nor, on the other hand, did the UK authorities acknowledge any requirement that amendments affecting the powers or rights of provincial governments or legislatures could be made only with the unanimous concurrence of the provinces affected. They did not profess to act as general trustees for provincial rights or powers. And that is really important because there was a disagreement between the provinces and Trudeau at the time, and then you'll find out why. So here, again, you just need to read here where the arrow is, the UK role in circumstances of federal and provincial disagreement. So in such circumstances, it would be in accord with the role accepted by the UK authorities in 1931 for those authorities to satisfy themselves that the request conveyed the clearly expressed wishes of the Canadian people as a whole. And this is the key. Okay. Even in 1931, the Canadian government failed, and the provinces, to get a referendum by the Canadian people as a whole right across Canada before any changes. Because what happened in 1931, Canada was liberated. We could have been in power in 1931 above our government, but the federal government and the provinces did not want the people to know this, nor the Indigenous nations, because then that would have given power to both sides above government. So they asked to remain, to make sure that only the UK could change the constitution. So because they didn't know how to go about the separation of powers, we were still kept under the UK up until 1982. And then now, because of the finalization wasn't done in 1982 in regards to our rights, we are still under the UK today. And it's still awaiting repeal, but we need to do something about it since the government has not given us our referendums since 1992. Then it's up to us to take them now, and it needs to be led by the people and not by a government that is embedded in corruption. So this is why we're doing this. Okay. So again, so they have to come to the Canadian people as a whole. So since that role was assumed at the specific invitation of Canada as a federally structured whole, such an exercise of it would neither violate Canada's sovereignty or independence, nor improperly question the authority of Canada's national government or parliament, nor would it be inconsistent with any precedent established by the practice or statements of UK ministers since 1931, for these have not been directed to circumstances of the sort now being considered. So again, that no referendum by the people, no go. So here again, we have two arrows here, very important. So again, the view expressed in 1912 by A.B. Keith, a British constitutionalist who was then in the colonial office and involved in an official capacity with imperial dominion relations, appears to us to be fair. Very different principles apply to the alteration of a constitution, which is the result of a federal compact, from those which apply to the alteration of an ordinary constitution. As was recognized in an ample manner in 1907 on the occasion of the amendment of the British North America Act in accordance with the wishes of the federal and provincial governments in the matter of the financial subsidies to the provinces, the Act is a formal instrument of constitution which can be amended by the Imperial Parliament and will be so amended, but only in accordance with the wishes of the people of the Dominion as a whole, not either federal or provincial bidding. So when it comes to us, it's not about the heads of the provinces or the premiers. The premiers have no say. and neither does the Prime Minister. It is the people that have a say. So we need to all understand this. And we need to make sure that the Canadian government understands it. Okay. So now to give you an idea of what was happening in between 1981 and 82 in the UK Parliament. And, for those who remember 1982 and what transpired, this might ring a bell. Here, one of the members of Parliament in the UK said, "My honourable friend, the member of Essex, South East, Sir B. Brain, has shown clearly and cogently how certain parts of the Charter offend and infringe two international agreements to which we are signatories. Article 17 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Articles 1 and 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Some of us may not wish to be signatories to those two agreements, but we are bound by them. So long as we choose to be fettered by those covenants, they remain shackles upon the House, and we should recoil from any legislation that infringes upon them. To do otherwise would be dishonorable, even disreputable. It is, of course, true that Canada is also a signatory to both agreements, but whether she decides to infringe them is not a matter for us. Two wrongs cannot make a right. The Indian nations are justified in questioning the bona fides of the Canadian Prime Minister. I say that with great regret. As long ago as 1969, he spoke in Vancouver about the need to bring to an end the historic treaty rights of the Indian peoples, and spoke of how, in due course, those rights must be extinguished. He refuses even now to sit at the conference table to discuss and define what those rights are. He will not do so until the new Constitution of Canada is established. And at that stage, he will have the power to override the Indians. And this is what the United Kingdom stopped the Canadian government from doing, because Pierre Trudeau wanted the UK to accept the patriation, to not change anything other than do what he wanted them to do. And they did the reverse. And at the same time, they also saved us, because once, if they would have done what Canada would have done, the Constitution, just the Charter and some of the other information in the Charter that he gave, would have robbed us of everything, and especially the Indigenous nations. And then he would have had the power over us, and it would have been hard to, have the backing of international law behind it, because he would have destroyed it all. Because that is the one thing he promised all the provinces once they finally agreed with him. He had promised them to destroy Indigenous titles right across the board so that the provinces could all take over the lands. And they could take me to court on that one. So here, the 1960 decolonization patriation, our right to collective self-determination by referendum in 1982. So here is the international law and what it stipulates. Okay. So any laws that override our international human rights that Canada and the UK both signed in 1976 become null and void. Okay. Unconstitutional, null and void, ultra vires our Constitution, because then you will see that inside our Charter, there's a fine line where it states that, yes, Canada is bound to these international instruments. Now, under international law, there's automatic rights that we have. And these are erga omnes. Self-determination has been recognized as an erga omnes right, and even as a preemptory jus cogent norm, which is an automatic right. In international law, obligations in whose fulfillment all states have a legal interest because their subject matter is of importance to the international community as a whole. It follows from this that the breach of such an obligation is of concern not only to the victimized state, but also to all of the other members of the international community. Thus, in the event of a breach of these obligations, every state must be considered justified in invoking, and probably through judicial channels, the responsibility of the guilty state committing the internationally wrongful act. It has been suggested that an example of an erga omnes obligation is that of a people's right to self-determination. A just cogens obligation is a rule or principle of international law that is so fundamental that it binds all states and does not allow any exceptions. Such rules, sometimes called preemptory norms, will only amount to just cogent rules if they are recognized as such by the international community as a whole. A treaty that conflicts with an existing just cogent rules is void. And if a new just cogent rule emerges, any existing treaty that conflicts with it automatically becomes void. Treaty, contract, whatever you want to call it. Right now, the World Health Organization, everything they're trying to do, and even the laws that Canada is creating in regards to health for Canadians is and should be void. States cannot create regional customary international law that contradicts just cogent rules. Most authorities agree that the laws prohibiting slavery, genocide, piracy, and acts of aggression or illegal use of force are just cogent laws. Some suggest that certain human rights provisions, example, those prohibiting racial discrimination, also come under the category of just cogent. Now, 3, the will of the people as a whole. It is undeniable that any people entitled to the right to self-determination must exercise it freely, whether through a plebiscite, referendum, or some other agreed procedure. Representativeness of a government in the context of a right to self-determination is that the government and the system of government is not imposed on the population of a state, but that it is based on the consent or assented by the population, and in that sense is representative of the will of the people, regardless of the forms or methods by which the consent or assent is freely expressed. We get to decide on our referendum. We get to decide the questions, and there's nothing the government can do about it. And this is how the Citizens Convention of Consent was birthed and why we came up with it. And also any other format that we decide to agree. So you'll be getting a chance to do all that. Okay. So, and this is putting our government on notice, the RCMP and everybody else who is going to try to interfere with these rights, and including the Governor General, because she can be charged as an accomplice to everything that's been happening in government. Now, civil and political rights to collective self-determination. International law does not impose a restriction on the people's choice as to the form of government, as long as the exercise of that choice takes place in a free manner without any external influence or coercion. Foreseeing democracy means, okay, they're talking about the parliamentary democracy, as the only legitimate outcome cannot truly be considered a free act of self-determination. Okay, so parliamentary democracy actually removes our right to freely act under self-determination. So parliamentary democracy is only good for a colonial system. So with us, we have the right to change this into a pluralist democracy, okay, which can still be like a parliamentary democracy, but Parliament will not have final say. Should not have final say. Excuse me. For some of the issues that affect us all, they should have some rights, but it's up to the people now to decide. So you can read about this through Self-Determination in International Law, a Democratic Phenomenon or an Abuse of Right. And the thing is this was combined from everything that was said at the international level and determined in regards to the right to self-governance. Okay. So now this is Canada's version and their explanation. So this is a constitutional monarchy and the Constitution lie of 1982. Here you see the Queen and Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And in regards to the patriation of the Constitution, Queen Elizabeth II with Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau signing the patriated Constitution. Well, it was patriated, but not quite finalized. Okay, it was being patriated. It still needs the finalization of our referendums. So now Canada's constitutional monarchy has roots in both French and British monarchies. At Confederation, political leaders decided to remain a constitutional monarchy. Now, 1867. Now, Canadian version. According to the Constitution Act, 1867, and what happened in 1982 is instead we went from the BNA Act to the Constitution Act 1867. So the UK changed that because what came back to Canada was basically a draft of a constitution. Then now you guys can change whatever you want once you've achieved your referendums. Okay. So then you can go and amend your constitution. But until we had the referendums, they had no right to change the constitution. So the executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue to be vested in the Queen. This gave Canada a system of government modeled of that of the United Kingdom. However, the British government continued to control Canada's foreign policy. So that was in 1867. Then 1931 happened. Then we were able to do, like prisoners in a yard. Well, now you guys can govern yourselves in your own yard, choose your, the laws you want to put. And but the international level, the UK is going to handle all of that. You can't deal at the international level. Then in 1982, we should have been completely free to do what we wanted. However, nothing was finalized. And that's when, again, the Canadian our parliamentarians, 1931, did a coup d'etat to make sure that the Indigenous nations and the people did come to power, inserted a clause there. And then in 1982, tried to get away with basically murder of our rights and got bit by the UK, but at the same time silently. And now we find ourselves in this mess today. So over the years, Canada gained more control over its relationship with other countries. In 1982, Canada's parliament gained full control of its constitution in what is now known as patriation. Now, this is a blatant lie, okay? They got full control of a draft. The others are still alive and well in the UK legislature. Okay, that hasn't changed. So Canada is playing with a constitution based on a lie. Okay, so under the Constitution, the Crown is the source of nonpartisan sovereign authority in Canada. So in other words, the Crown has the power to govern. So the Crown can take over anytime it wants, but entrusts this power to the elected government, which holds it on a temporary basis. As head of state, the monarch is above politics, unlike the head of government, the prime minister. But here again, they allude to something, not quite right. So the governor general has the exact same powers as King Charles right now, and has to exercise those powers for the people. And if she does not, she could be guilty as well in regards to not serving the people. So the 1968 Cabinet Manual of Canada states the principle that the government must retain the confidence of the sovereign, hence the governor, as well as the people through parliament. So now again, what Trudeau has been doing goes right against our peace, power, and good governance. So that again is an infringement on the Constitution. It goes against the Constitution, and every allegation that was out there and everything that was done, even if it's just allegations, it's putting our country in a dire place, and the Governor General would have to order investigations right across everything that's transpired for the longest time in Canada, but especially since the inception of the pandemic. And then in regards to our rights and the laws that they've created that should not have been created. So here, April 17th, 1982, the initial lie and theft of our rights. Here you have Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom, Canada, and her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, and defender of the faith, okay? So here you have Elizabeth, and then right underneath her signature, Jean Chrétien signed underneath to witness her signature. And and I've said this again yesterday, Mr. Peckford, everybody thinks that Mr. Peckford is the last living survivor of that era. And no, he's not. Jean Chrétien is very much alive. And I think there's a Mr. Morris something in Quebec, but I could be wrong. But Jean Chrétien is still very much alive to this day. And he was responsible as well of stealing our rights along with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Now, the crown, understanding the concept of the crown. This I did not show yesterday because I just added it here real quick. Now, the whole realm, to be able to understand this, I think we need to really visit this, so that, because there's a lot of arguments with the constitutional lawyers and constitutional law and in confusion about the reserved powers of the crown. And I think we're going to try to clear that up for them, and especially with the documents that were found in 2020 that they might not even know about. So we're going to save them a lot of arguments. Now, the whole realm can be understood as a corporation symbolized by the crown. The communal aspect of the crown would be realized, and the need for the community to identify with the crown and foster a sense of community could also be fulfilled, where the crown to be understood in the sense of the history of European ideas, 13 democratic realms. So anyways, this is a work that was done that you'll be able to research later. So the democratic rendition of the crown symbolizing the whole realm would be separate, but live alongside the king's body politic, occupying the dignity. The dignity, the office of kingship, is a corporation, and the king in his political capacity is also a corporation. The revisiting of legal thinking, current understanding of the crown in this article differs from others in that the crown, it is suggested, should refer to another aspect of the past dualities recounted above. Now, the crown should be associated neither with the king nor with the office of kingship or the government, but with the realm understood in an actualized democratic way. So it's the whole of the country. The realm, or the commonwealth, as Maitland preferred, is a body corporate aggregate of many represented by the head, the queen in parliament, where the queen acts in her political capacity as occupier of the office of kingship, and parliament embodies the will of the people. Parliament embodies the will of the people. The democratic potential of the medieval concept of crown as a body politic, which included the king, the corporation of king, lords and commons, and the whole realm as a body politic, can now be fulfilled post 1688 and the arrival of responsible government and universal suffrage, with the queen in parliament as legislative sovereign. The queen and her subjects, through the democratic process, come together in parliament. They form the head of the body politic. Without one of them, the head cannot function. In that reconceptualization, Her Majesty's courts and government act as the judicial and the executive arms whose actions are guided by parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law. The assembly of these distinct entities can be reconceived as the crown, understood as a corporation aggregate in which the whole body politic of the realm is contained and headed by the queen in parliament. And then you'd have the governor general in parliament instead. Okay, so this goes on, but it kind of explains everything. So here again, the 1982 patriation process failed to fully decolonize the Canadian Constitution. Consequently, Canadians were deprived of their civil and political right to select their head of state, establish governance rules, or a people's collective leadership with veto powers as co-owners, shareholders of the Crown and Corporation sole. Okay? So eventually you'll get it. But right now what happened in 1982 was that the UK kept the BNA Act, recalled it for Canada's sake, the Constitution Acts 1867 to 1982, with the Canada Act 1982 also attached. So with what, and that that part is what Trudeau gave them, but the UK felt that they could not proceed in the way that Pierre Elliott Trudeau wanted. And thank goodness for that. So here again, if you go and you look at our Constitution, here it says Constitution Act 1867. If we had been truly decolonized, this would have been repealed. It still has not been done, has not done so. So now the Constitution of Canada includes the, both the 1867, 1982 Charter of Rights and Freedoms with the separation of powers. So here again, item number 12, if you read this, then you'll see all the powers, authorities, and functions which under any act of the Parliament of Great Britain or of the Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland or the legislatures of Upper Canada, Lower Canada, and so on. So again, this would have been repealed. It was not. To a certain extent, it would have been changed from Great Britain to the Queen of Canada. And then that wasn't done. So again, now the Queen and King as corporation sole, royal succession and the Canadian Crown as a corporation sole, a critique of Canada's succession to the Throne Act 2013, Philip Lagasse and James W.J. Bowden, and they wrote this. It's a really good piece. So here the Crown as a corporation sole serves a more critical purpose. It ensures the perpetuity of the state and governing authority. Because the Queen of Canada is a corporation sole, all the decisions, authorities, and constraints that surround the Crown as the state and executive, such as those found in the Constitution and in the statute, are preserved as successive natural persons who occupy the office of sovereign. Moreover, the Queen of Canada's status as a corporation sole ensures that all references to the Queen, the King, Her Majesty, His Majesty, and the Crown over time are synonymous and thus refer to the same legal personality. Consequently, there is no need to reaffirm the powers of the Crown or the constraints on those authorities upon a demise of the Crown and the accession of a new natural person as the next reigning sovereign. Nor is there any need to rewrite any laws or clarify the previous decisions to bind the Crown. Are still binding. As a corporation sole, the sovereign never dies in law, while natural persons who serve as a monarch pass on, the legal personality they embodied lives on. Hence, it is a corporate character of the office of the sovereign which ensures that the authority of the state and executive continue uninterrupted as successive natural persons occupy the office of sovereign. So they have, they're wearing two hats there, but at the same time, that's what stands in the way of the people having our rights above the Crown or to our own corporation sole. So at the last minute, because they are a holder of all this, they can make a decision whether there's a convention or not, or constitution. They can go ahead and say, hey, this is in jeopardy. We're taking it back because you guys can't run it. And the thing is we can't take that chance. Okay, even if they say, oh, that will never happen, we can't believe them. It's time. The people should have had that right in 1982. It's time that we take that right now. So here again, succession to the Throne Act 2013. And this was, again, to be able to switch, just like when the Queen died, it went to Charles. So this is all that it says. We had to review that act in 2013. And all they did was say, okay, well, we agree that yes, they can marry a Catholic, and it can be either a male king or a male queen, a female queen, I should say. So it didn't really matter. So strategy and compliance with the rules of engagement in our collective governance. Now, food for thought. And in regards to what we have to think about, because Canadians can't just turn around and do what we want. Okay, we have to follow some of the laws. Yes, we have our rights. We can't just go and say, well, we got the rights to do this, and no matter what, we're going to go and do it. Well, you need to be prepared, and we can't just terrify the rest of the countries and all of the people who have investments in Canada. We can't create chaos. We need to create stability, and by taking our rights the right way, the proper way, without creating chaos in Canada to our economy or anything else. As long as we play by the rules and do what we're supposed to be doing and proceed in the way that we should be doing, along with a caretaker government that will be in place to help us rectify and clean up our governance, then we should be fine, and every other country can do the same. So we need to be careful what we say, what we do, and how we do it. We don't need to take in pseudo common law and all of those things. We need to just focus on what we can change and how we need to do it with the legal standing that we can have here or anywhere in the world in regards to the existing laws. Okay, we don't need to go chasing rainbows or unicorns and lollipops that don't exist in law. Okay, so food for thought: to achieve our complete independence, given the experiences of previous decolonization of over 80 countries, we must pay attention to the suffering and hardships experienced by the people at the hands of those laying in wait internally, wanting to manipulate and take control over these countries and peoples. So when the 80 countries decolonized, there was total chaos. Okay, because of internal fighting, civil unrest, and you name it. We don't need to see that today. And then there's laws in place to make sure if we want to take our rights, we got to make sure that we don't have NATO in our face and, having all kinds of financial issues and stuff like that. We need to show that we are mature. We know where we're heading. We know how to do this peacefully. And, that's how we got to maintain things, people. You can't just go shooting off your mouth. Okay, so therefore, measures were put in place to protect the international economy affected by our country's investments and resources in the event of chaos and civil unrest. Now, Canada, as the second biggest country in the world, having many international corporations and countries invested into Canada, we as a people can't just go along and do what we want without consideration of those facts. We have to watch every action we make to make sure that the cards don't come falling down any more than they already have, given this Liberal government and NDP coalition and all the chaos that they have created. So adhering to the rule of law, international law, and human rights is essential, as maintaining a functioning government is crucial to avoid plunging the country into further turmoil. The one thing that plays in our favor is that nowhere does it say that our parliament or provincial governments have final decision-making authority, or that a president, monarch, or chancellor holds the full political authority over the people. The political rights and authority remain with us through our civil and political collective rights to self-determination and self-governance as a whole. And we need to ensure that never in the future of Canada will any politicians have the right to take that over. Okay. So now the Constitution of Canada is its Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And what do we need to look when we see how the government ripped us off? You must look for what is missing from the International Bill of Human Rights in Canada within the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to see what is omitted on purpose. The major thing that was omitted on purpose here was our right to self-determination, our right to have a say in everything that the government does. Okay. So they'll say, well, we hold meetings and we post online, that you guys could come and apply to speak to us. That's not it. They have to address every single Canadian when they have something to say. Okay. So now all government officials and justices have consistently misled Canadians and Indigenous peoples beginning with 1960 and 1982, either through malfeasance or ignorance. Okay. The Constitution's patriation shrouded the public's rightful authority, as the people, not the crown, were intended to exercise power through formal decolonization from colonial ties, established in 1960 for all colonial countries in international law. This included self-governing countries, if they chose to, within the Commonwealth realm, such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK itself, and others, according to international law. And that's because we have Indigenous nations. Now, international instrument fraud committed by our governing bodies. 1. Question of the visibility of the Crown and reserve powers. The government have lied about the patriation from the UK Constitution Act 1867-1982 preamble that proves that our Constitution remains in ownership of the Imperial Parliament and Crown, plus Section 12 under the incomplete decolonization by Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Mulroney in regards to us needing referendums. So if you remember the time of Mulroney, we had the Meech Lake Accord and the Charlottetown Accords, both failed. And that's what they were supposed to try to do. But in both instances, they lied to Canadians about what that referendum needed to be about. Okay, they hid that. So now, 2, improper application of the International Bill of Human Rights. The government and provinces intentionally neglected to decolonize the people by failing to empower them as the official shareholders, co-owners of Canada, instead of the Queen in the Constitution. These rights were given to all peoples of colonized countries during the decolonization process initiated in 1960, ratified by the UK and Canada in 1976, and further perpetuating their colonized state. The Canada Act 1982 remains an integral part of the UK legislature, awaiting approval of the Constitution by Indigenous nations and Canadians through referendum within 15 years following patriation to accept or amend the Constitution via Second Minister's meeting. See UK-Canada Act, Hansard 1981, and I promise you, excuse me, that it makes for very interesting reading. Now I'm trying to drink some lemon water here. If I make a face, it's a little tart. Now, the UK legislation, BNA Act 1867, is still in effect in the UK legislature as of August 2024. The only changes to the BNA Act was the French translation added for Part 1, okay? So here again, so the current unknown changes to legislation. They changed it in 1991. Okay, they added the French translation in 1991 of the changes to that. But they don't call it the Constitution of 1867. It's still under the BNA. Okay. Now here, UK legislation, Canada Act 1982 in effect, still as of August 2024, under UK Public General Acts. If this had been settled, this act would have been repealed, as well as the BNA Act, out of the legislature of the UK, okay? And none of that was done. So again, no changes here. So that's still the UK. They still have the right to change it. Now, the one thing that they changed again, they made that change in 1991. You've seen for the language. And now in 2003, they also changed the BNA Act under Section 1940 C36. And in regards to the criminal justice regarding Northern Ireland, Order 2003, and here they changed the affecting article, which was Article 17. And here it says changes made to website text. They changed the BNA Act, but they did not change the act on the internet, okay, on the web yet. But they did change it physically in the document. So if we would have been decolonized or patriated and be a truly free country, do you think the UK would be going through this anyway after the fact? No. So here we have, again, you'll see here, if you look to the right, 1982, the Canada Act. These are all acts that have not been finalized, I would say, on purpose and hypocritically by all of these countries that are still now tied to the belly button of the UK because things have not been final. Why? Because they want to remain in power over the people. Now, here it says to ask that this was a request being made because of these acts. And it was debated on Monday, the 12th of June, 2006. So to ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs if she will list those acts and parts of acts which received royal assent between 1976 and 2006, and for which her department has policy responsibility, which remains in force. Okay. Now, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has policy responsibility for the following acts, which remain in force and which received royal assent between 1976 and 2006. Some of the acts contain provisions which appear to be spent. Okay. A definite list of all of the parts of acts in the relevant period for which the department has responsibility could not be provided without incurring disproportionate costs. So they're saying, well, all of this costs money, but a lot of these are not finalized. Okay. So failed patriation on the Canadian government's part. And this is, again, the Hansard Parliament UK Commons, where you can find this. Okay. So that's the fraud committed against us. So applicable worldwide, governments had 10 years to implement the Bill of Human Rights, 1960, and the ones that they added, 1966. So the Canadian government, instead of taking 1966 to 1976 and applying those laws, they only ratified them in 76 and then tried to say, well, now we'll do them. And they never did. Okay. So here, what our rights are is Article 1. All peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. 2. All peoples may, for their own ends, freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources without prejudice to any obligations arising out of the international economic cooperation based upon the principle of mutual benefit and international law. In no case may a people be deprived of its own means of subsistence. The state parties to the present covenant, including those having responsibility for the administration of non-self-governing and trust territories, shall promote the realization of the right of self-determination and shall respect that right in conformity with the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, Article 2, each state party to the present covenant undertakes to respect and to ensure to all individual within its territory and subject to its jurisdiction the rights recognized in the present covenant, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. So see, we don't have those in our constitution, in our charter, okay? All of these, we have the right to political, they're saying that the convoy was political. Well, yeah, they had a reason to be there and to stay there, and they were protected by international law to also remain. So here, Canada's forgotten and trampled on legacy by our parliamentarians. Our own Canadian John P. Humphrey helped draft most of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Syracuse Principles. Now, the Syracuse Principles came into effect because a lot of the countries were overriding the rights of the people. So they had to create non-derogation rights, even in times of war or emergencies. And one of those is freedom of expression. And a lot of those rights you need to know about because Canada infringed upon all of them during the last 4 years. So here it says, if a country is found guilty of violating the international law by breaching its obligations under the treaties to which it is a signatory, or by flouting the customary international laws, it can be directed by the courts to immediately cease the illegal acts and make reparations for the damages caused by the said act. The country in default also needs to assure that it will not repeat such behavior in the future. Canada and its provinces have broken their legal commitments over and over, which the Canadian courts are or should have been aware of. Okay, and now John P. Humphrey is actually, the Trudeau family was very good to his memory, but yet steps all over it. Only somebody evil would do something like that. Now he's commemorated in Côte Saint-Luc in Montreal. So here, the International Bill of Human Rights, ratified by the UK and Canada in 1976, includes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Okay? So here it says the International Bill of Human Rights countries normally had up to 10 years to implement all of the human rights covenants in their entirety. The UN and or signatory countries can charge Canada with Canada's violations from all levels of government down to municipalities by not having fulfilled their duties to the binding international instruments. Okay, and then you can find them here. So not gonna bother reading that. We're gonna move on. And here's the Syracuse Principles. And the Syracuse Principles is very, very, very important because if you remember Justice Mosley, who said that the emergency measures that Trudeau brought forth were unconstitutional, but he made a statement that if they would not have used, to protect the nation, then they probably would have gotten away with it. But at the same time, no, the Syracuse Principles was set up on the limitation and derogation provisions in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights for the specific reason of protecting the people against rogue governments. And then you see John P. Humphrey's name here, Canada, as one of the vice presidents of the Commission of Jurists that gathered, from around the world to make sure that we were protected. So non-derogation rights of Canadians are specific. Neither Canada, the provinces, or municipalities had the right to implement emergency measures without protecting the people's rights of non-derogation. And courts were to remain open and obliged by law to adjudicate violations of non-derogable rights. Because the lawyers would go and put the charter up there or the provincial charters, they failed the Canadian people because what supersedes all of those are our international instruments that override the ones that are missing in our Constitution, and that Canada cannot use as an excuse to override those rights. So again, here, non-derogable rights. No state party shall, even in the time of emergency threatening the life of a nation, derogate from the covenant's guarantees of the right to life, freedom from torture, cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment, and from medical or scientific experimentation without free consent. Freedom from slavery or involuntary servitude, the right not to be imprisoned for a contractual debt, the right not to be convicted or sentenced to a heavier penalty by virtue of retroactive criminal legislation, the right to recognition as a person before the law, and freedom of thought, conscience, religion. These rights are not derogable under any conditions, even for the asserted purpose of preserving the life of the nation. Do you hear that? And I hope parliamentarians are watching this, and every municipal office and provincial government. Now, the ordinary courts, here number 60, the ordinary courts shall maintain their jurisdiction even in the time of public emergency to adjudicate any complaint that a non-derogable right has been violated. The courts had to stay open to make sure the government didn't override its rights, the rights of the people against them. Okay. So now, what are the international human rights ratified by UK and Canada in 1976? Well, these are a whole bunch of international human rights treaties to which Canada is a party to, okay? And these are all the treaties that Canada pretends does not matter, that does not recognize inside of Canada. Those are outright lies. They are legal issues here, ramifications that Canada could be facing because they ignored these. Now, under international law, the country's international obligations are assessed from the national level, in which includes all communities and cities. The provinces themselves, as a legal entity, is not recognized as having separate rights. Canada is responsible for the treatment and respect of all international laws affecting the Canadian people as a whole. Therefore, the provinces have to honor the equal rights of Canadians and not have separate laws within different provinces, communities, municipalities, or cities, even in Quebec. We have equality rights. All of our rights, a Canadian is a Canadian right across the country. So is an Indigenous person right across the country. Our rights are full right across. No province should have different rights or different laws or different constitutions. That is a colonial system, and that is the lie they keep perpetrating to make us think that we have different rights in different sections of the provinces, and that the people, the provinces own the resources in those provinces. No. A Canadian is also a shareholder, co-owner of all of the natural resources across Canada, same as the Indigenous nations. They have the right to the resources all the way across Canada, plus on their own territory. So they get a benefit there. But because, why? Negotiations and treaties that we need to respect. So again, you need to be very careful as to what you know, what you say, and how you repeat things. And you need to be in the know to understand how things go, to be able to make good decisions for this country. Okay. So therefore, here the UN and or signatory countries can charge Canada with Canada's violations by the provinces, the municipalities, and everyone from all levels of government down to municipalities by not having fulfilled their duties to the binding international instruments. Okay. Now, the provinces need to swallow that real long and real hard. So here, where do we find that? They say, oh, it doesn't say anything like that in our charter. Yes, it does. I'm not a lawyer, but I like to exercise my civil and political rights, and I have the right to discuss all of these issues and even law with every other citizen in Canada or even at the international level, because we have the right to discuss the future and what we're trying to protect here. So again, if you look at Section 52 of the Constitution Act 1982, the Supremacy Clause, here you'll find where Canada states that it is bound to international instruments binding on Canada. So similar provisions may be found in the following international instruments binding on Canada. Mind you, then they put two little points, and then they go on to try to only show that there's only a few things that they're bound to. Only a couple of things instead of all the instruments I just showed you before on the previous page. Okay. So here it says, we'll start with the provisions here. The Constitution of Canada is the supreme law of Canada, and any laws that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution is, to the extent of the inconsistency, of no force or effect. Now, that doesn't mean that international law is now inconsistent because of the Constitution of Canada. No, it doesn't mean that. Okay. International law is embedded in there. So similar provision, the Constitution contains 3 provisions that are relied upon to provide an appropriate remedy to findings of inconsistency with the Charter. Section 52(1) of the Constitution Act 1982 provides that a law that is inconsistent with the Constitution is, to the extent of the inconsistency, of no force or effect. Section 24(1) provides remedies against unconstitutional government action, and Section 24(2) provides for the exclusion of evidence obtained in violation of the Charter. Now, again, here, the Canadian Bill of Rights does not include an identical provision, although Section 2 is somewhat analogous. Okay, so they try to confuse you with the Canadian Bill of Rights. What's the Canadian Bill of Rights? Where is it? Is it in here? Where do they show it? We have a Canadian Bill of Rights, but is it included in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? So this is where they tried to make everything so confusing. So again, so now you have to add similar provisions may be found the following international instruments binding on Canada. And this is the key here. International instruments binding on Canada. So you go back to all of those are embedded, actually added to our charter within our rights. And that's what needs to be discussed when, we go to court and we want those international rights protected, not just the charter rights, because the charter rights fall short and the whole encompass of all of the Bill of Rights at the international level encompasses everything. And that's what the lawyers would have needed to use since all these shenanigans started. So the way they kind of, allude to things, it says, here it says Article 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 2.1c of the Convention of Elimination of Forms of Racial Discrimination, Article 2f, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and Article 4.1b of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So they kind of make you think that, oh, this is the only ones we that are binding on Canada. And then now see also the following international, regional, and comparative law instruments that are not legally binding on Canada, but include similar provisions. So they're trying again to make you think that, oh, okay, those international law rights, there's only a few that Canada is bound to, and it's a lie. So now we'll move on. International Bill of Human Rights must be respected and equal across the country by the federal, provincial, municipal governing bodies. So these are the different levels that you'll be able to read here once I set out the presentation. Now, under equal rights and our right to collective self-determination and decolonization, even as an independent country, state, all provinces must impose the same laws, fees, fines, etc. Otherwise, we are still under colonialism. All Canadians are to have the same rights across the whole country other than on Indigenous territories, because we don't have rights on their territories, but they have rights on both. Okay. Now, the Indigenous nations have the same rights as Canadians across Canada, but also have their own rights in their territories, which includes all territories across Canada and natural resources as a whole. So just because you have an Indigenous nation in BC, they have the rights of all the natural resources, and their rights are count all the way across Canada. Okay. Right to PEI and whatnot. And it's the same thing in regards to our natural resources. We have the rights to natural resources right across. And this is why none of the provinces can cut everybody off or say that they can separate. That's why. Okay. No province is sovereign within Canada, even though the, who did I hear? Supreme Court Justice Wagner, okay, using these words. But with everything that's transpired in Canada and what we've noticed, I would suggest that we take a really long look at Justice Wagner in regards to his actions and the determinations that he gave in some of the cases, because they are very questionable, if not downright insulting. So anyways, Mr. Wagner, I've said it before, you were in conflict of interest and you're still in conflict of interest now. So no province can separate from Canada unless both Canadians and the Indigenous peoples across Canada agree to allowing it. And this is what was said during the court case for the separation of Quebec. It is the people across Canada that would decide if Quebec could separate or even Alberta can separate. And again, then you also have the Indigenous nations who have their right to say no. So, hey, good luck with that one. Okay, they still have rights to their lands and their resource and to the resources on our side. So no, and this is why René Lévesque kind of gave up there. So everybody who thinks that they can separate a province and become its own country, none of these provinces were ever countries before, and they never will be. Okay, country at the international level, they will never allow the country to separate that way, and that's already been determined. So don't even think about it. So 2 referendums will be required for both peoples, the Indigenous nations in regards to their rights and what they want in the Constitution, and to sit with us as equals in the Constitutions, because it is their right. You have 2 peoples in Canada, Canadians and Indigenous peoples, and that should be named in the Charter. So here, I want you to listen to this because it's in regards to non-derogation of human rights.
Governments are facing formidable challenges to protect people from COVID-19. I'm a physician, I've been Minister of Health, President of the Republic. I know that these kind of measures are needed. But the emergency power some governments have adopted should not be used as a weapon to quash dissent, control the population, and even perpetuate their time in power. Exceptional measures should be used to cope effectively with the pandemic. Nothing more, nothing less. Under human rights law, states are able to restrict some rights to protect public health. They also have broad powers if a state of emergency is declared. But the restrictions need to be necessary, proportionate to the need, non-discriminatory, and time-limited. Certain rights, including the right to life, the prohibition of torture and ill treatment, and the right not to be arbitrarily detained, can never be set aside under any circumstances. Police and security forces in some countries have used excessive and sometimes lethal force to make people abide the lockdowns and curfews. Shooting someone for breaking a curfew because they are desperately searching for food is clearly unacceptable and unlawful. So it's making it difficult or dangerous for a woman to get to a hospital to give birth. In some cases, people are dying because the way the measures supposedly put in place to save them are being applied. So to help states in the response to COVID-19, the UN Human Rights Office has issued new guidance on exceptional and emergency measures. Our guidance stresses that law enforcement officials should only use force when strictly necessary. Some countries have introduced measures and laws that refer to vaguely defined offenses. Some are detaining people for breaking lockdowns, thereby adding to congestion in prisons. This risks making the pandemic worse. So I'm concerned that such measures and laws may also be used to muzzle the media and detain critics and opponents. It is important to counter misinformation about COVID-19, as this poses a huge risk to people, but so do bad policy decisions. Shutting down the free exchange of ideas and information undermines trust and may damage the effort to contain COVID-19 and its harmful socioeconomic effects. We have seen many states adopt justifiable, reasonable, and time-limited measures, but there has been worrying cases where government appear to be using COVID-19 as a cover for human rights violations, restricting fundamental freedoms from civic space, and undermining the rule of law. Exceptional measures and state of emergency should be independently reviewed and subject to proper and regular parliamentary, judicial, and public oversight. It is clear states need additional power to cope with this crisis, but the abiding principle must be that exceptional measures are enforced humanely. If the rule of law is not upheld, then the public health emergency risks becoming a human rights disaster, and the negative effects will long outlast the pandemic itself.
Okay, so now we're going to move on, and I'm going to go back here and click that. Seeing my face. Ooh. International law breaches by levels of national, provincial, and municipal governments of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, indoor, outdoor, or online. This is extremely, extremely important, people, because all of the laws that they have created now, and I've said this to Mr. Lametti and Trudeau and all of the senators, that they were not allowed to accept C-17, C-11, and all of the other ones, C-63 and now C-65, because of this, okay? And this was a guarantee for the convoy to be able to remain where they were in place. And also the city of Ottawa knew at the time, I gave them these documents to all of the councillors. I gave this to the RCMP, and you name it. So now I think I'll have to resend it, because whoever was there at the time must have been bought and paid for and controlled, and never should have been able to be allowed to ignore these facts. So protected rights, general comment number 37 in 2020 on the right of peaceful assembly, article 21. And they drafted this in 2020 because they could see people protesting everywhere worldwide, and they had no choice but to determine that. And that's what you heard in her speech and the commissioner's speech earlier. So the convoy did not threaten the life of a nation, and neither did COVID-19. What endangered the life of the nation are the illicit actions of the Canadian federal, provincial, and municipal governments. They are the ones who are terrorizing the people of this country and forcing them into things that are that should be deemed illegal, and they are the ones who are interfering in our policies. So we need to be able to really enforce our rights so that they can be brought to justice. So, introduction excerpts. The fundamental human right of peaceful assembly enables individuals to express themselves collectively and to participate in shaping their societies. The right of peaceful assembly is important in its own right, as it protects the ability of people to exercise individual autonomy in solidarity with others. Together with other related rights, it also constitutes the very foundation of a system of participatory governance based on democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and pluralism. 2, peaceful assemblies can play a critical role in allowing participants to advance ideas and aspirational goals in the public domain and to establish the extent of support for or opposition to those ideals and goals. Where they are used to air grievances, peaceful assemblies may create opportunities for the inclusive, participatory, and peaceful resolution of differences. And this is what the government of Canada denied the convoy. So again, now number 3, the recognition of the right of peaceful assembly imposes a correspondent obligation on state parties to respect and ensure its exercise without discrimination. This requires states to allow such assemblies to take place without unwarranted interference and to facilitate the exercise of the right and to protect the participants. The second sentence of Article 21 provides grounds for potential restrictions, but any such restrictions must be narrowly drawn. There are, in effect, limits on the restrictions that may be imposed. Now, for the full protection of the rights of peaceful assembly is possible only when other, often overlapping rights are also protected, notably freedom of expression, freedom of association, and political participation. They could not be charging people with political crimes, okay? Our political aspirations or thoughts are protected. Now, protection of the right of peaceful assembly is often also dependent on the realization of a broader range of civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights, where individuals' conduct when individual conduct places them outside the scope of the protection of Article 21, for example, because they are behaving violently, they retain their other rights under the covenant, subject to the applicable limitations and restrictions. Now, this is the actual paper itself. You'll see here. Now, when Facebook started blocking everybody for Justin Trudeau in regards to them being political, just as when we lost our CPU, Canadian People's Union webpage on Facebook, Facebook had no right to do that because we have these protected rights. And the Canadian government cannot force Facebook to do all that. And the Canadian government cannot charge Facebook with anything that it is trying to do. So Facebook and all of the other social media outlets could take this document and protect themselves against what Canada has been doing and other countries against social media and the people's rights online. So 1, recognition of assembly rights. The first sentence of Article 21 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights provides that the right of peaceful assembly shall be recognized. Locations, outdoors, indoors, and online. Article 21 of the Covenant protects peaceful assemblies wherever they take place, outdoors, indoors, and online, in public and private spaces, or a combination thereof. Such assemblies may take many forms, including demonstrations, protests, meetings, processions, rallies, sit-ins, candlelit vigils, and flash mobs. They are protected under Article 21, whether they are stationary, such as pickets, or mobile, such as processions or marches. Right to privacy and other rights of participants and bystanders. The way in which assemblies are conducted and their context changes over time. This may in turn affect how they are approached by the authorities. For example, given that emerging communication technologies offer the opportunity to assemble either wholly or partly online, and often play an integral role in organizing, participating in, and monitoring physical gatherings, interference with such communications can impede assemblies. While surveillance technologies can be used to detect threats of violence and thus to protect the public, they can also infringe on the right to privacy and other rights of participants and bystanders and have a chilling effect. Moreover, there is increased private ownership and other forms of control of publicly accessible spaces and communication platforms. Considerations such as these need to inform a contemporary understanding of the legal framework that Article 21 requires. So they need to understand Article 21, and the cops have to also understand these laws and stop interfering in people's lives. Now, Article 19 protects assemblies online. While the notion of an assembly implies that there will be more than one participant in the gathering, a single protester enjoys comparable protections under the covenant. For example, under Article 19, although the exercise of the right of peaceful assembly is normally understood to pertain to the physical gathering of persons, Article 21 protection also extends to remote participation in and organization of assemblies, for example, online. Now, no interference by service providers to restrict assemblies online. So this is where Facebook had no right to shut anybody down or to do what they're doing now, which is making sure that nobody really sees us, so that we could turn around and maybe sue Facebook for that if they don't start waking up pretty soon and doing what the people want and respect that right. So many associated activities happen online or otherwise rely upon digital services. Such activities are also protected under Article 21. State parties must not, for example, block or hinder internet connectivity in relation to peaceful assemblies. The same applies to geo-targeted or technology-specific interference with connectivity or access to content. States should ensure that the activities of the internet service providers and intermediaries do not unduly restrict assemblies or the privacy of assembly participants. Any restrictions on the operation of information dissemination systems must conform with the tests for restrictions on freedom of expression, which are very, very limited. Okay, very hard for them to do so. So here I want to make sure to put this back in there just as a reminder that this little clause here protects us. Everything that I'm reading to you right now is automatically included into our charter. So when they go with the charter, they need to say, hey, include the civil and political rights. Now here, expansion of international law binding agreement breaches 1982 to August 2024 and ongoing. This is in regards to what the Canadian federal and provincial governments and municipal governments are doing against us. Now, the governments and provinces' deceptive conduct have infringed upon the international legal frameworks and trust outlined in the Vienna Convention and others such as the Statutes of Rome, impacting signatory nations, Canadians, and Indigenous peoples. Concerning the International Bill of Rights and other treaties Canada is legally bound to uphold, stipulated within the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 52. Okay. These include the derogation of citizens' non-derogable rights during emergencies or wars ignored during the questionable pandemic. So you can see the Syracuse principles there. Okay, so I'm not going to read all this here either, but that can be read at a certain point. But the reason I put this in there is because I'm not the only one that's been screaming since 2017 about the Syracuse principles. There's also these fine gentlemen. So in this blog that was posted by Dr. Ryan Alford, he talks about that, and so do the rest of these lawyers. So again, since the launch of the Center of Constitutional Studies, Pandemic Powers, and the Constitution blog, a number of thought-provoking posts have been penned by leading scholars in the areas of public law, health law, and constitutional law, including the contributions of professors David Deisenhouse, Paul Daly, Judith Chandri, Amy Swiffen, and Maxime Saint-Hilaire. And then you have the writings of Dr. Ryan Alford here. So again, that's just extra reading that you can see about the ICCPR. They only really come back and say exactly what we've actually said before. So you'll be able to read that at a later date. So now the Governor General has the power to fix our country for the people by removing the Liberals immediately and before the next Parliament in session. And she also has, though, to keep in mind that the NDP have also acted on a, I would say, criminal level in the corruption of supporting the Liberals in the thefts of the monies from the Canadian citizens that they took for their own selfish reasons. So the Governor General of Canada, Mary Simon, is the representative of Canada's head of state, King Charles III. This role is established in the Constitution Act 1867, which states that the Governor General will carry on the government of Canada on behalf and in the name of the King. So right now she needs to carry on the government of Canada because it is being destroyed by our politicians, where none of them in Parliament are removing or enforcing the removal of Justin Trudeau and the Liberals and placing a caretaker government instead while we await a new election. Now, the monarch and vice-regal representatives in Canada, known as the Governor General and Lieutenant Governors, have prerogative and reserved powers, and she has the exact same powers as the Crown. So she needs to be able to exercise that power because she's the only one that can hand out monies in regards to our purse when, let's say, Trudeau would be taken out and have a caretaker government. Then the caretaker government has to ask her, and she's the only one that can give them funds from our securities. So the reserved powers in Canada fall within the royal prerogative and belong specifically to the monarch, as the Constitutional Act 1867 vests all executive power in the country's sovereign. These can be made in theory without the approval of another branch of government or the Crown itself. However, they are only used in emergencies. One of these powers is to ensure that there is always a First Minister, that is a Prime Minister for the federal government, or a Premier under the provincial government. So she needs to do that immediately. And if she doesn't, and this is why we need the people to get together and force our referendum, and to force Justin Trudeau to resign, or at least even be, how can I say, the RCMP has to start really looking at pressing charges against him and make sure that he can't leave the country, and neither can Freeland and the rest of the Liberals who have participated in illegal activities against our funds and everything else and our rights. Okay, so we're not going to read this right now either. It's just about what the Governor General of Canada does. And the Governor General and responsible government, the government's version by omission. So they say that, responsible government is peace, order, and good government, the POGG. So when they talk about POGG, that's what they mean. The principle that the executive branch of government is accountable to the elected representatives in the House of Commons. Now, conventions of responsible government, those are informal rules, conventions that require the Governor General to act in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, who has the support of the majority of the House of Commons. This statement, okay, and this is my statement here, this statement is not an absolute truth. The Governor General can still fire a Prime Minister even with the support of the House. See Australia, October 1975. And that's because of the letters that were found in 2020 and what transpired in 1975 when all of the constitutional lawyers thought that the Governor General of Australia did not have the right to fire the Prime Minister and, when he had the support, when he was supported by the entire House of Commons. But yes, the final rights of the Governor General is the same as the King, and because he has to protect that Constitution in our country, he can fire anybody at will. Okay, but he has to be justified, or she has to be justified. So the Governor General's role: the Governor General has the constitutional responsibility to ensure that the conventions of responsible government, POGG, are respected. That is not being respected now in Canada, and it has not been respected actually since 1982. But really, we can say that right now, with what's happening and all of the allegations, she needs to move things along. So, okay, which means almost acting on the Prime Minister's advice. So again, here is the lie. Okay, so the Governor General has a constitutional responsibility to ensure that the conventions of responsible government, POGG, are respected, which means almost always acting on the Prime Minister's advice. She doesn't have to listen to him. She doesn't have to give royal assent. She's not bound by it if she has, and she's supposed to have a lawyer there to help her, or at least the Supreme Court justices to help her make decisions when there's an unconstitutional law being drafted. If she has, she cannot be assenting to unconstitutional laws, and she has done so, and so has previous Governor Generals, and even when Chief Justice Wagner from the Supreme Court of Canada became interim Governor General, he assented to the laws that were going against our rights, and that was again conflict of interest for him to do so, and then again to maybe sit, hopefully he wasn't sitting on the bench, given the fact that he was the one giving royal assent to certain of these acts and laws that were coming through. So again, you got to be very careful with what's going on. And these people, when they're put in the place of Governor General, they are supposed to be knowledgeable and to make sure that we're not being taken advantage of. And if they fail that, then they are in jeopardy of acting in a misfeasance manner. And that's not good for Canadians. So rules of Parliament, again, PM resignation. In Canada, the resignation of a Prime Minister terminates his or her commission, and consequently his or her government. A fresh commission must then be granted to a person to form a new government. The Canadian Privy Council Office explained in its 1968 Manual of Official Procedures of the Government of Canada, the Prime Minister's resignation from office brings about the resignation of all ministers and of the government. Whether the Prime Minister's resignation follows a defeat in the House or at the polls, or is for personal or other reasons, the life of the ministry is terminated with the formal acceptance of his resignation. Individual ministers, however, continue in office until the new government is formed. The government is identified with the Prime Minister and cannot exist without him. He alone is responsible for recommending who will be appointed ministers due to his political party winning the election. He can recommend their replacement or dismissal, and he can bring about the resignation of the whole government by his own resignation. Now, refusal of dissolution. The refusal of a dissolution may also give rise to the effective dismissal of a government. As Heard noted, rather than remove outright a government from office, a governor can induce a change in government by refusing its advice on some important matter, such as advising that an election should be held. If a government loses the confidence of the lower house, House of Commons, and advises a dissolution, and the head of state refuses to grant a dissolution because there is someone else who could form a government, then the chief minister is expected to resign. The 1926 King Byng affair in Canada is treated not only as a refusal of a dissolution, but also as an effective dismissal. If a chief minister does not resign after his or her advice to dissolve has been rejected by the head of government, he or she may be formally dismissed. Who's the head of government? The Governor General. So here you see here federal and provincial branches of government and how all of these go down from the legislative to executive and judicial. So it all comes down to right now Mary Simon, Governor General. And in Ontario, it would be Edith Jumeau. I'm sure she's still there. But anyways, that's how that works. So deliberate omission of the personal reserve powers of the Governor General by governments in times of emergency or special circumstances, such as a constitutional crisis, exercising the special personal authority of the Governor General to appoint or dismiss a Prime Minister, dissolve Parliament, or refuse royal assent of bills can be done without permission from the King. She doesn't have to ask nobody's permission, not even Trudeau or nobody else. Although this authority is rarely used, it must be implemented at this time in order to restore good governance. This has to be urgently undertaken given the abuse of power and the administrative and financial mismanagement of Canadian funds and assets by the Liberal and its supporting NDP government, further incriminating and affecting the authority of senators and Parliament, the Indigenous peoples and Canadians. Okay, it needs to be done now. So we're under a constitutional crisis. So what the Canadian government doesn't want you to know about the reserve powers and that the Governor General is the guardian of the Constitution. Why it matters to Canadians, Indigenous nations, federal, provincial, and municipal politicians, government legislatures, government administrators, and the courts. Power and responsibility. The reserve powers of the Crown continue to exist in Canada, exercised by vice-regals on rare but significant occasions. Their use highlight periods of constitutional uncertainties and crises when vice-regals may be called upon to make a political decision of major consequence, all in the name of defending and upholding the constitutional order of responsible government and parliamentary democracy. The 1968 Cabinet Manual of Canada states that the refusal of advice to dissolve Parliament amounts to the withdrawal of a Governor General's confidence in the Prime Minister. This is based upon the principle that the government must retain the confidence of the sovereign, hence the Governor, as well as the people through Parliament. The people are fed up. So I'm just going to take a drink here. Excuse me. But the people have had it in its time. 1 second here. Okay, sorry about that. Where am I here? Okay. So, jeepers. Now, peace, order, and good government, POGG, is a phrase that is used in Section 91 of the British North American Act of 1867 for responsible government, now called the Constitution Act 1867. So now they're starting to use responsible government instead. So here, in 1975, a monumental precedent unfolded in Australia when the Governor General dismissed the Prime Minister despite their parliamentary support. And this is what's going to has constitutional lawyers all mixed up worldwide who are part of the monarchy or trying to do research on that. But in 2020, a court order in 2020 revealed the precedent set in 1975 regarding the personal reserve power of the GG of the 15 Commonwealth realm countries under the Imperial Crown. Okay, so I think I'm going to have to take a break here pretty soon. Now, in 1975, a monumental precedent unfolded in Australia when the Governor General dismissed the Prime Minister despite their parliamentary support. The Governor General claimed this action preserved good governance, though many disputed his authority to override the elected leader and dissolve the government. Nevertheless, the Governor General exercised his personal prerogative to apparently safeguard the monarchy and stability of Australian governance, according to his private letters to the Queen released in 2020. And this is the young lady that actually did the research and finally went to court and won her case and got her hands on those letters. So here again, just to give you an idea of what they kind of look like, this is it. And now we're going to move on here. And the most important part here is the fact that the Governor General knew that he did not have to ask the Queen's permission to fire the Prime Minister. And the reason for that is that the Prime Minister was starting to talk about Australia becoming a republic. So he had to protect the monarchy at all costs. And that's why he fired him. Okay. And he was protecting the monarchy and used the personal powers of the corporation sole, which is the right to protect everything and their business, really, their corporations. So this is how this was used. And, you know, it stipulates it right in there. You know, that he was protecting the monarchy and he wasn't doing it any harm. So here it says, it is, of course, true that anything you may do could indirectly affect the monarchy, perhaps an unenviable, but is certainly a very honorable position. If you what the Constitution dictates, you cannot possibly do the monarchy any avoidable harm. The chance you will do it good. So just in case you do not know it, I should like to quote to you Arthur Mahan's splendid phrase about the role of the Crown Governor General in the Canadian Constitution. I hope you will forgive me for quoting a Canadian to an Australian, but I think it is good stuff. So anyways, when we start reading these letters, we see exactly where the Governor General knew and had no doubts about his rights, full rights to clean house. If it's there's a constitutional, as long as he doesn't go against the Constitution and he is fearing for something happening to, you know, the head of state, well, he needed to move forward. So here it says, the fear of discretion left to a Governor General under our Constitution and under our practice is a limited sphere indeed, but it is a sphere of dignity and great responsibility. Within the ambit of discretion residing still in the Crown in England and residing in the Governor General in the Dominions. Okay. So again here, even though 1931 happened and the realm all came together, they still knew that, you know, the Queen was not really divisible. And I'll explain that after. So the Crown in England and residing in the Governor General of the Dominions, there is a responsibility as great as falls to any estate of the realm or to any House of Parliament. Within the sphere of that discretion, the plain duty of the Governor General is not to weaken responsible government, not to undermine the rights of Parliament. It is to make sure that responsible government is maintained, that the rights of Parliament are respected, that the still higher rights of the people are held sacred. Okay, the still higher rights of the people are held sacred. It is his duty to make sure that Parliament is not stifled by government, but that every government is held responsible to Parliament and every Parliament held responsible to the people. So they still owe us that duty, even though the Crown can step in. Okay. And this is not being done here today. So here again, in regards to the Queen, here it says, from the Queen's point of view, I am sure that the one important principle to be maintained in what Her Majesty will only accept the Crown in Papua New Guinea on the advice of her Australian ministers. Everything else, the details of the Constitution, the exact wording of Her Majesty's style and title, and so on, will come under this constitutional umbrella. So even in 1975, after Australia was independent, just like the other countries except for Canada, to have, you know, the UK fix our constitution, Australia wasn't placed in that position. However, because the Queen is not truly divisible, in the sense that she is the Queen for all of the realms, she is the Queen for the UK. She's the official Queen of the UK, and this is where, in this statement here, Usually, because Papua New Guinea was separating from Australia, because the Queen is the Queen of Australia, she had to take the advice of the Australian government in regards to Papua New Guinea. But in regards to her style, titles, and rights, that remains the right of the UK Parliament. Okay. So again, I will read this here. From the Queen's point of view, I'm sure that the one important principle to be maintained is that Her Majesty will only accept the crown of Papua New Guinea on the advice of her Australian ministers. Everything else, the details of the Constitution, the exact wording of Her Majesty's style and title, and so on, will come under this constitutional umbrella. The umbrella of the United Kingdom. It seems to me, with respect, that those responsible in Canberra are very much alive to their responsibility in this matter and are keeping a watchful eye on the Queen's interests. And then on this letter, it says, Path and I have no doubt that it is, he's re-answering. So Path and I have no doubt that it is an honorable function of the monarchy to provide a canopy beneath which newly independent countries can find their feet and make up their minds with the experience of independence on how exactly they wish their final constitution to be framed. So Papua New Guinea want to remain under the Queen until they decide what they were going to do with their constitution. Okay? Because at that point they can walk away. So again, when you fall under the crown, you fall under the UK. The UK ministers have the right to counsel the Queen on what happens in that country because of her rights and titles and her constitutional rights. So again, you know, it's a little bit confusing, but at the same time, we need to understand what we're dealing with here. So again, here, this is just the Crown's sovereign power stems from royal prerogative, which include the personal reserve power. The Crown is tasked with safeguarding the corporation for the people while leading as its head of state. Okay, so here we have a schematic that you'll be able to see here. So now this is, again, just something going back to what happened from 1925 to 1926 in Canada. You know, and then Stephen Harper, 2008 prorogation crisis. Michaëlle Jean could have said no to Stephen Harper, and she could have, you know, because they weren't. He hadn't prepared his. If I remember well, it was the budget, and he needed more time to fix the budget. So, anyways. So again, the Kerr Palace Letters, 1975, released in Australia in 2020 by the High Court. All of the constitutional lawyers now will have to go and read these letters and see exactly what the rights the Governor General had in regards to the Queen's personal rights and place that all together. And this is what we had to go and look for and to see exactly, because even back then, the secretary for the Queen, excuse me, did not want to allow the people to know exactly what was going on in regards to her personal powers, because if everybody knew that the King Charles or the Queen could turn around tomorrow and take over Canada and start running it legally, even though we could kind of do a battle there, you know, because we're being misfits and allowing our government to dishonor the crown, they could step in and do something if they legally wanted to. And because the people would find that out, they might want to get rid of the crown altogether. Okay, so here in Canada, and I don't know why it does this. Oops, I'm gonna have to go back here and go back to this other one. See, this is the whole presentation here. Where am I? I clicked a little too fast. Okay. Oh, right here. Now, this one is really important. We are being ruled by law and not under the rule of law. And this has been being proven by Paul Salambier. And this means that we are under what is called a soft dictatorship by stealth. Canadian laws are not formed properly as dictated by the rule of law. They are badly written laws drafted by those and usually lawyers at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels, who do not understand how to properly draft laws or ensure that the laws do not circumvent our legally binding Bill of Human Rights in Canada, that Canada and the UK have signed, that supersedes the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, this kind of overlapped here for some reason. Now, deinstitutionalizing corruption, published in the loophole. Now, somebody mentioned earlier that Trudeau says that, oh, there's a loophole he can use. No, he's lying through his teeth. There's the only loophole that he can use is based on the lies that the government has already created in regards to the old ways of changing laws within the provincial colonized way. So no, he can't do that, and he's only lying through his teeth. Okay, so the first area involves here is the use of subjective modifiers, like using words like reasonable or significant, and in other words, words that are incapable of any fixed meaning because they denote a quality that is inherently subjective. Because they are subjective, their assessment will vary from person to person, and the use of such term in legal rules gives officials charged with implementing those rules an opportunity to distort the application of the rules for their own purposes. So they're using words that allow them to manipulate the laws to suit the outcome they want. So again, here you have the word reasonable. Well, it was found over 2,000 times in the statutes. The word unduly was found 71 times in the statutes. Excessive is found 235 times in the statutes. Significant is found 1,096 times in the statutes. And there's a lot more. Paul gave me the list, and I've been looking at that list, and to go through all of the laws is just unbelievable. But somebody at the end of this, we're going to have to make sure that somebody goes in there and rechecks all of these laws because they do not follow the rule of law, because they're using terms like this created by lawyers and who don't even understand our international law rights, let alone our human rights, or even legislatures that don't even have the full understanding. So we need to teach all of these people. It's not Jordan Peterson or others that need to go back for re-education, because the way that they've turned things around now is that they're forcing us to accept lies and to agree with lies. And that's the woke mentality. So now they've brought in the woke mentality within our governance, which is totally wrong. And when you're supposed to accept gender and all of these things, when your chromosomes don't lie, they are forcing us to lie and saying, okay, yeah, chromosomes lie. They say follow the science when they do not follow the science. Because if you follow the science, we'd have no issues with transgenderism, okay? No issues at all with that. It's straight and forward. Chromosomes do not lie. So when we're looking at even words in our laws that can be subverted, what do we do with that? Well, we need to go and clean all that up. People, we need to clean house, and we need to do it fast. Okay? So we're sitting on all this information, and it's like, oh my gosh. So now we have, at first, David Lametti, that was breaking all the laws, never should have come out with the emergency measures. And as the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General, he should have been fired and not even have a pension. And he should have been charged with misfeasance because it was deliberate. And that's a fact. And he should know that. And now Arif Virani should also know that in regards to Bill C-63. So like his predecessor, David Lametti, Arif Virani's Bill C-63 is in contravention of the International Bill of Human Rights and the Syracuse Principles. Now, example, cruel and unfair punishment through excessive fines and incarcerations and interference in the non-derogation of our online protections of freedoms of expression, Article 19 and 21 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR. The statement below is a great example of the government's doublespeak, which is how they cover up their true agendas and duplicity. Doublespeak, false claims of protection. Example, the Liberal government has tabled Bill C-63, which aims to protect people, especially children, from harmful content online, including sexual exploitation and hate speech, through the creation of a new regulatory body called the Digital Safety Commission and changes to the criminal code. Well, that sounds really good, right? But then they stick a whole bunch, if they stuck to what they actually say and mean and not, hide other things within it, it'd be totally different. Now, the act would amend the criminal code to increase sentences for spreading hate online. It would boost the maximum sentence for advocacy genocide for 5 years to life imprisonment. This is criminal. It would boost the maximum sentence for advocating genocide from 5 years to life in prison. Bringing in the medical countermeasures that they did under the COVID-19 protocol and having people take a treatment that was not even designed for what was the real issue. Well, these people need to be placed under life imprisonment for advocating genocide, for creating genocide, because that's exactly what happened in the last 4 years. Now, do you see why we need to stop them? Because we can prove that the issue, the virus that is at issue, could not create a viable infection in normal cells, in healthy cells. It could only affect the very sick. And so the international community could not list it as a HCID, a highly infectious contagious disease. So they had to remove it as of March 19th, 2020. So the whole 4 years that we've been going through and the shenanigans that they're doing now in regards to everything. And then we find out that our own government has been creating viruses since 2001. Where's it coming from? We have all of that information, people. We've given it to you. Please read about it. So everything that they've done, they need to be locked up. We have the proof of that. They only have to go back to the source, which is the virus itself, and then find out why the World Health Organization didn't want any of the countries to divulge the information behind the isolation of the chemical, the makeup of the virus, and to claim that it was under national security. So when people ask about the isolation of it and want to know, what happened, how it was created or what it was, the UK said, we can't give you that information because the World Health Organization asked us not to divulge that information. So now we're claiming national security. What were they afraid of? They claimed that they were afraid that, anybody could go and remake this virus in the lab. Well, guess what? DARPA, United States, the countermeasures for Canada, UK, Australia, and the United States, DARPA put out a request for proposal in January 2018 to create a coronavirus. And they're pointing their fingers at China, the country? No. Wuhan, China was one of the corporations from Wuhan who works with the United States, who brought in a proposal for $14 million to create the virus for DARPA. But then DARPA says, well, we never accepted their proposal. Why? Because they probably got it here in Manitoba. When you look at SARS and then you look at SARS-CoV-2 and everything that transpired, I'm not a genius here, but holy crap. Houston, we've got a problem. Okay, Canadians there, listen up. Because, again, a lot of things were done here in this country by the hands of our scientists and at the hands of our government to bring about a new transhumanist agenda in order to be able to bring about all of this fourth industrial revolution where our genome is and all genomes that exist, like even the way you live, everything you do is your DNA. So they need to do all of this data thing, and they're going to bring all this from the WEF and analyze us from our toenails to our hair, and do whatever they want and use us as their petri dish and our children. So again, we're up to page 65 here. It's 12:26. I think I'm going to end it there because Mr. Varani here needs to lose his legal license, and I have no problems with that. And the University of Toronto needs to be able to check what it teaches its lawyers from on the international in regards to international courses. But anyways, things need to get done. We need to get a move on this, and we need to enforce our referendum that they stole from us since 1982, and to clean this government. We need a caretaker government in place and ordered by the Governor General ASAP, and we need to enforce that immediately and stop fooling around, because what they're trying to do now is bring in legislature to bring in a law that states that they're going to pick a certain date for an election, and then we are stuck with Trudeau up until that date. We cannot afford for them to come up with a law and to choose October 2025 as the official date of every 5-year interval for elections. We cannot allow that to come out as a law, and we need to be able to make sure that we can remove them the minute they are doing anything under corruption or unethical. So I will leave you with that. I need to get going. But we're at page 65, and I'll come back later to finish the presentation. So incompetence in the administration of governance and justice, creating division and hate. Yes, Mr. Varani, you need to step down, and you need to do it fast, and you need to drop all of those laws that you're trying to pass through government, because all of you are guilty and should be facing criminal charges. So please support the Canadian People's Union, because the Canadian People's Union and all Canadians and Indigenous nations deserve a real life, deserve a happy life, a happy future, and we need to clean up the mess that stands in our way to save our country, our natural resources, and to protect our children and our people. So this is why we are going ahead with our people's referendum. Whether the government likes it or not, legally, we have the right to do it. And we are the ones who agree on how we are doing it, not the government. And the government at some point will have to start assisting us so that we can reach all Canadians. So our politicians, to all of our politicians in Parliament, to all our senators, to Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, all of yous in the provincial governments, in the municipal governments, you need to rewatch this video, learn our rights, and make sure to clean up your mess, because we're going to clean it for you. And when we clean it for you, then you'll have to suffer the consequences of your actions. The people have the right to stand up and to take their rightful place as the official owners, co-owners of the Crown of Canada. And there's nothing you can do to stop us, because anything you try to do would be criminal. You are the ones that did a coup d'etat since 1982, and it's time for the Canadian citizens and the Indigenous nations to get what they deserve, which is an equal partnership in governance in Canada, and for the corruption to end, and for our natural resources to be preserved. So please go to the cpu.ca. If you want to become a member of the Canadian People's Union, you have to send us an email or in our contact page asking us, because our memberships are exclusive. We are making sure that everybody is vetted who come into the CPU. And or if you know somebody that used to be a member, or you used to be a member, then we'll add you on there. But if you know any of our members, they can send you an email and they'll get you a link to where you can sign up. And we're going to do another section for our referendum, where people can sign up to that section as well, to create the communication there. So by Monday, everything should be